So I am joined today by a fantastic panel of experts, each who have really refreshingly diverse perspectives on demand creation and what we mean by creating demand for nutritious diets in unhealthy food environments. So I'm going to ask you to come up and join me so I'm not quite so lonesome here. Ani Shankar, who is an economist and professor of food systems, nutrition, and sustainability at the University of Sheffield. Philip Baker, Australian Research Council Future Fellow at the University of Sydney. Eva Monterosa, who is Program Lead on Consumer Demand Creation at GAIN, the Global Alliance for Improved Nutrition. Atin Roy, who is Senior Vice President at Ogilvy, which is an international agency of advertising, marketing, and public relations. And last but not least, Temi Adegoroye, who is a sustainable agriculture and food systems expert and a managing partner at Sahel Consulting. What a lineup. I think we are in for a very rich and engaging discussion on demand creation. I think it's safe to say that all of us here are really quite motivated by the challenge as to how we build a food system that meets the dietary needs of all people in the world. But because we love a challenge, we don't just end there. We need to make sure that that food system is culturally appropriate, that it is environmentally sustainable, as per our keynote speech, that it was equitable and just. Unfortunately, the task for us is not small. Our current global food system meets none of these goals. We are witnessing a rapid dietary transition. And in every global region of the world, apart from South Asia, overweight has surpassed underweight as the dominant problem among adults. Meanwhile, in many parts of the world, child wasting and stunting are highly prevalent, and multiple micronutrient deficiencies persist, and they are stubbornly persistent over decades. Why is this? Why are we seeing this dietary transition? We can see that the consumption of ultra-processed foods has risen astronomically. I am currently just wrapping up a project from Bihar, which is in northern India. And we found that the number one most commonly fed food given to young children, the number one common food was biscuits. And we have yet to see what this dietary change is going to have. This rapid and prolonged and repeated exposure to sugar from such an early age, how that is going to harm children's health, and the impacts that that's going to have on the health system to cope. Meanwhile, consumption of nutritious foods, fruits, vegetables, animal source foods like meat and fish, eggs and dairy remain far below recommendations in pretty much every country in the world. Now, it's not like we've not been trying. We have spent decades of research in public health and nutrition. And historically, we started out focusing on low budgets and focusing on nutrition education as a solution. If only people knew what foods were good for them, then we would solve the problem. And it turns out, surprise, surprise, that does not work that well. However, we have since learned and tried and made quite a transition towards social and behavior change approaches that are striving to make nutritious foods be the affordable choice, accessible choice, the sustainable choice, and the socially desirable choice. And we do have some evidence that it can work, but it's not enough. And it pales in comparison to the impacts of the food industry. And what's more, the food industry have achieved their impact in the consumption of ultra-processed foods everywhere in the world. In the most remote places, you will find ultra-processed foods, even in the most rural places, and consumption among the poorest families. So whilst we often think of budget as being this primary binding constraint, limiting people's diets, the food industry doesn't see it that way. In fact, there is evidence that they're actively targeting households and regions with low incomes with specific strategies. So, oh dear. The food industry has highly effective methods for creating demand. And the industry, as with all industries since the dawn of time, have been thinking, how do we create demand for our products? How do we make our products desirable, essential, or even addictive? And they spend billions in marketing. So clearly the food industry thinks that their efforts are worth it, and clearly it's working. So that's why we're here today. We want to learn the playbook. We want to know the playbook so that we can either use it or challenge it to create healthy food systems. And that is leading to new efforts in public health and nutrition research to think about demand creation much more holistically than we have done in the past. We need to conceptualize demand creation, implement demand creation strategies. Unfortunately, the task is somewhat daunting because unlike the food industry, we're not selling a brand or delicious, addictive foods. We are promoting non-branded bundles of spinach or a box of eggs from the local market. There's no brand. There's no identity. They're expensive. They're perishable. And they don't taste as good. And another reason it's more daunting is because we just have one goal. The food industry just wants to maximize profits. We have multiple goals: health, equity, sustainability, justice. So with all these additional complexities in mind, we're here to discuss that today. Is the concept of demand creation useful? What does it mean? Does it mean a different thing for the food industry as it means in our mission in public health? Can we learn from the food industry? Should we learn from the food industry? What demand creation methods are working? What can we learn? And what are the top priority actions that we need to take? We need to understand how we can center agency in the aspirations of people around the world. How can demand be built in a culturally grounded, environmentally sustainable, equitable, and just way? Fortunately for me, I have some excellent people in the panel here who can help us figure out some of these important questions. I'd like to start the panel discussion today by thinking, first of all, what do we mean by demand creation, or is this just jargon? So, Bhavani, over to you. Let's take it from demand itself. What does demand mean from a traditional economics perspective?
Okay, hi everyone. So without boring you, because this is Economics 101.
What?
So basically in economics, the way in which traditionally demand is viewed would be that, so if you go back to how we think about an individual consumer who's making choice about what to eat, the theory of consumer demand, basically the assumption is that consumers have preferences for products. So they know what they want. Between healthy, unhealthy foods, non-food items, so they can actually, in their heads, they have a sense of what they like compared to other bundles of products that they could potentially purchase. So there is a set of preferences which may reflect their individual preferences, which may reflect their culture, which may reflect their tastes, their influences from friends and family, and so on and so forth. So that is all reflected in their preferences. Now, so they have to choose a set of products to consume from those preferences. So they have, obviously there are market prices which they face for each of these healthy and unhealthy food products. And then they have a constraint in terms of the total ceiling to their budget, which might be their income, for example. So they try to maximize the satisfaction from the consumption of these products, subject to these budget constraints, so that their expenditure on these products doesn't exceed their ceiling or their income. So what that means is that every individual in economics, in a conceptual sense, has got a demand relationship, which is basically expressing what they want to consume of various products, most prominently as a function of relative prices of those products. So, so your demand depends upon what the relative prices are, what your income is, obviously arising from what I just discussed before, but also including things like age, education, taste, culture, and so on. So that's how, in economics, we would traditionally view demand.
So prices do matter a bit then.
Yeah.
And so what does this help us understand about what levers we have if we want to increase demand, say, for nutritious foods or decrease demand for ultra-processed foods?
Sure. So in terms of, it should come as no surprise to anyone here that obviously prices are a big lever for anyone working in economics, relative prices of healthy foods compared to unhealthy foods. And quite often you hear sort of slightly simplistic take that economists only care about prices and income, perhaps. We'll address that in a minute. But basically, one thing I'd like to point out is that, yes, prices are tremendously important. So if you look at levers, for example, changing those prices of healthy foods compared to unhealthy foods, that's a massive lever. So if you have, for example, what is called a fat tax, a tax on an unhealthy food product, depending on the ingredient, which changes the price of the unhealthy food compared to the healthy foods like fruits and vegetables. That is a massive lever. Can anyone in this room give me an example of something that is more cost effective than a government? I'm going to tax chips, so whatever it is, soft drinks, sugar sweetened beverages, which has an impact at scale because it's not something that you need to roll out, or it's not some, it's government policy, and it can be done, and it's done routinely by various governments around the world, and it achieves scale. So it is a huge lever. But it's simplistic to say that that's the only lever we have. There are various other. This basic model of demand in economics has been spun out and refined and transformed into various other demand models, which give you a lot of insight into other aspects. So I'll give you a couple of examples. One is, of course, it doesn't have to be just prices and income, which economists work with. There's the whole choice architecture, which is the nudge stuff, which is the behavioral economic stuff. So you can actually work with preferences about how people value different kinds of products in the choice architecture. Another example is that there is a whole theory of prices that you observe for many foods in the market are actually reflecting a bundle of quality characteristics. So, for example, the price of milk is not just a price of a product called milk, which is generic, but it might reflect something like food safety. So, safe milk, consumers might attach a premium to it. So, that is an important part of demand creation. If you can provide safer milk, that is an important part of demand creation. So, there are levers like that.
But so far, you're talking here about market price. And aren't there some hidden costs here that this sort of framework are hiding? What about the time it takes to go to the market or the effort in preparing foods and all of these sort of hidden costs that don't come into the market price?
Yeah, absolutely. So if you go back to the textbook definition of prices, and it reflects prices in a very simplistic way, but there is again a whole literature where people have looked at transactions costs and the ways in which they affect economies of all types, economic transactions of all types, including demand. So, for example, a simplest way to view it is that you will find many economic studies which look at what people are consuming, and one of the things they will have in the regressions is the household's distance to the market. So very, very simple sort of metric. And typically they will find that distance to the market has an impact upon what you eat. So that is a very simple way of reflecting a transaction cost. The farther you are from a market, the more difficult it is for you to reach certain kinds of products, and therefore that affects your eating patterns. But there are more complex things like, for example, women's safety. So if in some parts of the world, if women feel unsafe to go to the market, then that constrains their shopping behavior, and therefore they will choose not to go, and that will affect the household's diets. Again, there is a way in which you can capture those things. It really depends on the researcher. If you're clever enough, if you're dedicated enough, and if you're willing to collect the data, then any richness you can think of can be incorporated into these models. So it's a bit of a straw man, in a sense, to tear down that basic model of economics. I have to say, it's quite often people apply those very straightforward models, but there are many, many people doing really exciting other things.
So hang on, when we've done that, then we moved away from prices and the individual preferences. Then suddenly you started talking about the wider food environment. You started talking about the distance to the market, or we might also think about farms. And you've been doing some work in marketplaces, in rural markets in India. What needs to happen in markets, and how does that fit into your understanding of demand creation?
Sure, yeah. So one reason we are focusing on markets in this project, it's called the Indian Food Systems for Improved Nutrition and Fusion, is based on a very simple fact that 70 to 90% of nutrient-dense foods, fruits, veg, milk, meat, eggs, and so on, are sourced almost in every part of the low and middle income set of low and middle income countries from the market, 70 to 90%. And this includes very poor settings. This includes subsistence economies. So to me, often the question is, rather than why are you focusing on markets, the question tends to be, why isn't the rest of the world focusing on this? Because I think that's a no-brainer, really. Everyone should be focusing on this and should have been focusing on this from the beginning. Sorry, I'm just a little bit biased. But yeah, that's a tremendous motivator. So what we're trying to do is try to embed within the market. And we are working in traditional food markets, which in many rural parts of the world is the node from which the rest of the rural food environment is determined. So if you've got vendors, village shops, they will all derive their supply from that node, which is the traditional food market. So we're trying to use that as a setting to embed a set of interventions within those markets, which will bring in all those levers that I talked about before. For example, food safety as a quality attribute. If you can improve food safety at those markets, then the theory of change is that brings people in to consume those products. They have a bit more confidence that the milk is safe, that the vegetables are not saturated with pesticide, and so on. If you provide better safety for women, then they're more likely to come out and purchase from that market. If you have, for example, if you have other amenities in the market, which make it a pleasant shopping experience, perhaps including non-food items being sold there, then people are more likely to come in. And then that's the pathway through which you can provide them with these nutrient-dense foods. And also using it as a platform for behavior change, because it's a point of purchase. So people are coming there with an intention of purchasing potentially and delivering innovative behavior change or choice architecture related behavioral nudges. So we think that's quite a powerful platform with which to do it. So that's why we're focusing on markets. And I think there is a lot of potential because traditional markets are everywhere in the developing world, and there is a lot of potential to work with them as the focus for interventions.
Yeah. Thank you, Bhavani. Phil, your work is much more macro level. And I'm wondering if we should have started there, because we've really started at the individual and looked out to the farms and the markets. But where does the sort of macro level factors, this commercial and structural factors come in? How do you conceptualize demand creation?
Thanks. Well, thank you for the opportunity to speak to this topic today. It's very fascinating. I'd like to start with the question of my own question, going back to your question, is demand intrinsic to the consumer? Is demand simply a matter of behavior, of choice, of parental decision-making? And by extension, is it just a matter of consumer or parental or individual responsibility? Can we change choice by appealing to consumers, educating them, attempting to change their behavior, or nudging them in the right direction through optimal defaults? And, I make no argument against those approaches, but I offer an alternative viewpoint. I am a social scientist or a political economist, and in my view, the choice is not intrinsic, it's structured. It's structured by people's everyday lived realities, by their income, their wealth, by the time they have to source, prepare, and cook food, by relations of gender and gendered power systems, and many other things that structure people's everyday realities in relation to food. And that's the structure of the lived environment. But the other part of that is this massive gorilla in the room. And that gorilla was mentioned in the previous session, which are firms like Coca-Cola. And just to contextualize my comments, over the last 3 years, we have been engaged on a very large program of research asking the questions of what is the problem of ultra-processed foods? What is the global health problem? What drives that problem? And how do we respond to that? And as part of that work, we did a really extensive investigation as, what gives ultra-processed foods power? And what gives the corporations that produce ultra-processed foods power? Because these foods, everywhere you look around the world, are displacing other types of foods in human diets. It's inevitable. We will talk more on this subject tomorrow morning. It's a shameless plug for a side event on ultra-processed foods, 8:30 tomorrow morning.
Tell us the answer, please. What gives them power?
Well, the thing that is often said about ultra-processed food, but many people miss because they're too focused on technical debates around what and what is not an ultra-processed food. The most important thing to understand about ultra-processed foods is that they are far more profitable to manufacture and make than other types of foods. You can get a lot more profit out of a corn chip than you can out of a can of corn. More profit is really consequential in the food system. We live in a capitalist society. And in a capitalist society, if you have more profit, you have more resources. You have more resources for marketing. Coca-Cola, Pepsi, and Mondelez, 3 of the largest ultra-processed food companies in the world, spend almost $14 billion every year just on advertising. And advertising is just one form of marketing. That is a figure that is 4 times the annual operating budget of the World Health Organization. It's a figure that completely swamps, that drowns out any budget of other types of food producers in our food system because they are not that profitable. It also swamps and drowns out the amount of money that governments are spending on healthy food promotion around the world. In this type of system, through the lens of political economy, marketing is a thing that can be defined, and we have a marketing expert on my right-hand side here. But from a political perspective, it is a form of ideological and cultural power in our food system. That is the essence of, in my view, demand creation. As we heard in the last session, St. Nicholas, Santa Claus, used to be colored green, is now colored red and white, of Coca-Cola. The transformation of an immense religious celebration in the service of commercial marketing, of selling more brown, sugary liquid. When you look at the claims on the products, we're using 10% less plastic in our Coca-Cola bottles, or made with real fruit, now with 20% less sugar. Immunity support. This product will make your child more intelligent, which is what we see a lot in my other research area, which is infant and young child nutrition. And this marketing is not perceived critically. It is by some. But by the large majority of the population, it is not. It is accepted, it is trusted, it is believed, and it powerfully influences consumer behavior. And so, just to finish, I will say, if we are to create demand for the other type of food, which are minimally processed foods, culturally appropriate foods, foods that have formed the basis of human diets for thousands of years, and that have formed the basis of food economies for thousands of years as well, if we're to create demand for those types of foods, we need to take down the gorilla in the room. Thanks.
Okay. That sounds like a challenge. Let us do it. Eva, in your work, you take a food systems approach. And so far we've looked at demand creation from the kind of individual to the farm to the market, and then we've looked from the macro level. How do you see demand creation? Your work is kind of looking across food systems, and you've been also thinking extensively about how we conceptualize demand creation. Did we miss anything in the middle when we talk about what demand creation means?
No, I think, well, first, thanks for inviting me. It's a real pleasure to be here and to talk about consumer demand, which I'm extremely passionate about. And I have to agree with my co-panelists here. You have to actually do both things. You have to look at the political economy, and you've got to look at the individual level. You've got to work at the markets, because markets is a place where these foods are being sold and distributed. So all of those things are correct. I think the advantage that I have is I work for an organization that looks at programming, and so we're able to mix and match and combine these approaches in order to, have a real world impact. So thankful that the academics are looking at this and exploring these things, and then there are people like me come along and take all that wonderful research and then put it into practice. So that's another way that we collaborate. Again, the way we've been conceptualizing consumer demand is very simply, and it relates to what has already been mentioned, is that it is about creating and sustaining desire. So what do consumers want? And influencing those choices at point of purchase. Now, influencing can happen through many ways. So it can happen by, and I'll talk a little bit about how we're conceptualizing that influencing. So, but importantly, in consumer demand, you have to work at all of these three levels. You have to work at the enabling environment level, which is what Philip was saying. You have to work at the food environment level, and you've got to work at the individual level. No one level alone is going to deliver demand. It's an incomplete solution. So again, essentially then what does that mean? Well, it means we work on healthier preferences, healthier options, and healthier choices, okay? And that represents the three levels. So the preference level is for us at the enabling environment. So we're gonna try to influence those collective preferences, those culturally appropriate preferences, the society level preferences. And the way we do that, again, is through the food culture piece. Okay, so really trying to understand the local food culture and emphasizing what that is, right? And making sure that that's front and center and not some fabricated version of it that Coke or any other big companies want to put forth. The second part is on the healthier options, and that sits at the food environment level. So Bhavani mentioned the quality aspects of it, and it is about having the kind of food products that are available, both packaged and unpackaged foods, right? Because we can all acknowledge that there are healthier packaged foods like milk, or some legumes are cleaned and packaged, and so on and so forth. So there are some packaged foods are healthy, and that at that level, that's a complex level, and that's where the individual and the policy interact. Yeah. So you've got to put both carrots and sticks. So the carrots are working with your food businesses, working with food retailers to really make sure that the healthy food products are front and center. And the sticks are the policy side of things. So the marketing restrictions, the taxes that you can put in, all of this kind of stuff. You've got to work on both ends there. And the one thing that we've been looking at again is this mandatory labeling system. And how do you create a mandatory food labeling system for both packaged and unpackaged foods, for all foods, to help the consumer make better choices, right? So nudge them along.
Is that working? Are you?
No, we're developed, and I don't know if Flaminia is here, but Ty and Flaminia have developed the actual food score modeling that would be used to then decide what label goes on, the kind of marketing restrictions that would apply, the level of the taxation, and so on and so forth. So that's in development. And then finally, at the healthier choices level, so at the individual level, this is really about decision making. So it goes back to what Bhavani mentioned. And understanding human decision making is really critical here. So again, going back to the science. And what does the science say? Consumers make choices using two ways of processing information. You're very intentional and goal-oriented, and nutrition needs to be intentional and goal-oriented. So if we're going to do that, we have to choose healthier foods every day. Like that needs to happen. The other way that you make decisions is on the automatic habitual level. So it's again what they were saying, the structural, what Philip mentioned. So that system structures your choices and it becomes automatic and it becomes habit. So you've got to work on both of those because one or the other, again, is an incomplete solution. So those three levels, healthier preferences, healthier solutions, and healthier choices are the way that we're working at GAIN to improve consumer demand.
I'd like to ask, just before we move on to my next set of questions, do you have any kind of top lessons to share from the practical implementation side? What do you think is really working or absolutely not working? And what are your kind of open questions that we need to answer in this space?
Yeah, I mean, well, our programs have an impact evaluation. Those evaluations will come in still in about a year and a half. So hopefully we'll see. But what our monitoring is telling us is that our the interventions that we're doing both at the market and at the individual level are working. But we've actually, you mentioned that a lot of nutritious foods are unpackaged. They don't have a brand. In fact, that's what we've done. We've created a brand for these nutritious foods. And our first, in the neighboring country to Tanzania and Kenya, we've launched a brand called Food Fiti. And the first product that we're marketing under our brand is packaged vegetables. So all types of vegetables. Being sold by informal sellers, the mama mbogas, in the informal markets. And it seems to be working. Both from the retail side, women say that more customers are coming to them and they're selling more vegetables. And that we're also seeing consumers trying new recipes, finding new ways to include vegetables. So we're improving that desire and consumers wanting vegetables. So that's also, and that tends to be a product that lacks a lot of desirability. Because just people don't want to eat more vegetables. And I think we can all agree with that statement. So that seems to be working. I think for like a lot of the, I don't know, the important thing I guess from us as a lesson learned, and it took us many years, even within GAIN and with the kind of resources that we have and sort of also our colleagues and the intellectual capacity of our research unit at GAIN to really understand that demand is not SBCC. And I think it's still an internal discussion that we often have. And I see a few of my colleagues here, there's those smiles, because they're fundamentally different. Yeah. And they're different in both their strategy and their scale. Yeah. And again, demand is really trying to work across all of these levels. And SBCC is something that we did and has worked really well in the health system space. It is not fit for purpose in the market level. So that's another thing that for us has been a real important lesson learned, is trying to distinguish the two. And when you do apply SBCC, so in what context do you do that? And in what context are you going to apply the demand approach?
Thank you. Temi, you have worked across the whole food system as well. And so I'd like to know from you, do you think that efforts to increase demand for nutrient-dense foods, are they too individualistic?
Thank you very much. And thank you for having me here. I would say not entirely, but considerably, I think to some considerable extent, they are individualistic. And why I said so is that I think when you consider demand creation from the perspective of the demand being created itself, or the individuals, organizations that are involved in demand creation, or even talking about the target groups for whom demand is created, I think there's a lot of, you could actually say that many of the efforts are individualistic. And I think until we really start to look at demand creation from a systems, change perspective, we may probably just continue to scratch the surface. And I will probably give some examples. So when I talk about the individual or organizational level, you realize that several actors are, doing different things, driving demand for nutrient-dense foods. But we can always ask ourselves, how well are they collaborating? And if we pull together all of these isolated efforts, are they really going to, lead to any significant change in, improving, nutrition amongst the people? And I think we all know what the answers to that would be. An example is we I think a couple decades ago, early 2000, we started an effort across a number of countries to create demand for OFSPs, orange flesh sweet potatoes. And I mean, today, vitamin A deficiency is still a public health concern. And many of those countries where we actually, actively drove demand for OFSP, there's still limited adoption of even OFSP. And that's what I meant by, the efforts of the individual, organizations involved in demand creation itself. Now, let me talk a bit about systems, the systems thinking, and looking at demand creation from a food systems perspective. Already, we all know, what the food systems framework, looks like. It's already a complex network of, a number of essential elements and drivers that could help us increase or improve nutrition. And what that means is that if we're able to walk across the length of the food systems framework and address all of the key issues along the food systems pathway, we are likely going to drive access or improve demand for nutrient-dense foods.
So, what sort of cross-sectoral efforts do you think are needed or have been most successful? Can you give an example? Because, like you say, the food system, when you look at it, is so complex, it can be hard to know where to start and where to prioritize in terms of strengthening those links.
Thanks. And yes, the food system is complex, but I think it's really clear how we can work together within the food system. And I'll give two examples. One, just very quickly, we all know about the school feeding programs across a number of countries. And indeed, the school feeding programs have actually been quite successful in some countries. I know about the efforts to promote the school feeding program in countries like Uganda, Rwanda, Nigeria. But it's not just food, it's not just the school feeding program itself. It's what I like to call the homegrown school feeding program. Because I think the school feeding program has to be rooted within the local food systems in those countries. And what that means is that you're producing locally what is used within the foods within that school feeding program. You are linking small scale producers to markets, and then you're using policy, at the public, sector level to drive that entire process. In that way, you are addressing this issue of demand creation, and access to, to nutritious food. And when you look at the school feeding itself, the architecture, someone produces, someone takes what is produced, and process it. Most likely, it will probably be a small scale or an SME, processor of nutritious food. But then you need transportation sector, you need, cold chain, infrastructure and logistics to be able to drive that. You need the education sector and the ministers or the ministries of education to key into it, and ensure that the right chain of schools benefit from it. And of course, you need the government. So when you look at it, that's cross-sector collaboration effort leading to, access or driving access to nutritious food within the school population. The other example I would like to give is, maybe just to move a little bit closer to myself, is one of the programs we launched at SIA Consulting called the our DIN program, Advancing Local Dairy Development in Nigeria program, with support from the Gates Foundation. A couple years ago, we started this program. And what we're really trying to do is to address the issues within the local dairy sector in Nigeria. Why should Nigeria have over 24 million cows, and Nigeria is a net importer of milk, of powdered milk? And we thought there's something that has to be done about that. And the way we conceptualized and we're implementing the ADI program is such that we're bringing everybody together. We're not just driving increase in the production of fresh milk. We're driving, improvements in nutrition at the household level within those communities where we're actually implementing the program. But beyond that, it's the role of policy. And I think it was to Phil's point. You can't expect the local dairy processor to continue to invest in, strengthening local supply chain for fresh milk offtake from small-scale producers when they know that they could actually import powdered milk, for a fraction of what they need to spend on building local supply chain. So they continue to, leverage the importation of the powdered milk. Okay. So what we then need to do is to figure out how policy can serve as a tool to incentivize those processors to be able to do more locally. And we've successfully worked with a number of government offices, the Federal Ministry of Agriculture and Food Systems in Nigeria, the Ministry of Industry, Trade and Investment, the Central Bank of Nigeria, the Ministry of Livestock Development, to develop the first national dairy policy, meaning that for the first time we have a roadmap for dairy sector development. The government is committed to that process. The private sector, mostly indigenous dairy processors, are seeing the benefit of this on their operations. And we're beginning to see a reduction in dependence of milk imports. Wow. But that helps the businesses to be stable, knowing that their supply chain for fresh milk is already fixed. But then the impact on the small-scale producers' households is actually quite huge. But not just that, it's also driving nutrition at the community level and making sure that we can bring the concept of dietary diversity, close home to those people in the community to say, you should produce milk, but also you should consume it. Yeah. But beyond just consuming milk, you also, can produce a few other nutrient-dense, crops, vegetables, fruits in your homestead. Grow that, combine that with milk, and you'll be fine. So I think generally, for me, demand creation has really focused a lot on promoting individual, food choices, really targeting individual behavior. But I think it goes beyond that. Yeah. It has to be all-encompassing, addressing issues across multiple sides of the systems, food systems. And I think that to improve nutrition, it's just as what we say. You can't improve nutrition just by coaching the players. You have to change the rule of the game. And changing the rule of the game, meaning what that means is that you're operating at the systems level and addressing all of those various systems or issues within the systems that will lead to something really, really big. When we are able to scale those activities, we can definitely drive demand. And I want to put it this way: we can improve physical and economic access to nutrient-dense foods. And physical and economic access is very, very important. Physical is it's available. Economic is I can pay for it, it's within my budget. Without addressing those, we are not really going to be able to drive demand.
Yeah. And what you say about the rules of the game, that's kind of where I started. I want to know what the playbook is and what the rules of the game are. So Atin, you're our expert here. Okay, so we've talked about holistic approaches, but we've also talked about it's not just a holistic, everyone working together here. There is a gorilla that we need to fight. And that gorilla has got billions at its disposal. So you have experience from, we could say, both sides of the aisle. Tell us the playbook. What does good demand creation look like to you? What is a good strategy?
Okay, Asante Sani, Helen, ANH Academy, my dear panelists and the audience. Voluntary disclosure, The two of the gorillas that Philip mentioned are our global clients, Coke and Mondelez. So I'm like kind of the evil cousin from the enemy side. Okay.
No, you're telling us you're telling us the secret. You're giving us the
I'll
secret.
spill some secrets here, right? From a communication point of view, right? For me, and the way the communication industry and the branding industry works, we work on the magic side rather than the logic side, right? So demand creation, apart from accessibility and affordability, I think is also a function of dream creation, right? Let me try to explain to it. Dreams are not about, hey, it's a life goal that I have. I want to be Tom Cruise or I want to be the president, right? These are micro dreams that we have every day. Like, biting into that juicy little burger over there. Or, I'm going out, my hair should flow, right? And that is where we kind of make decisions, which is a very system one kind of a decision making that we generally do, right? And these dreams of ours stay in those areas. So for me, I think dream creation is a function of the aspirations, the connections, and the stories that lie in most the human beings. And it's about nudging them in the right way, in designing them in the right way. Let me give you an example. uh, Oreo, right? Correct. Twist, lick, dunk. It's just a biscuit with some cream between it, right? There are thousands of biscuits like it, but the moment I say twist, lick, dunk, it's got a meaning to you. It's got a micro dream attached to you. You are seeing yourself, visualizing it right there, right? So connecting that to food, uh, we have all had carrots here, right? You've bitten into a carrot, but carrots make this noise like tuck, correct? Nobody's really sort of tried to tap into that. Nutritious food can have cool in it, right? So I'm saying that micro dream creation is for us, in the marketing side, is the demand creation.
It's working on me. I want a carrot now. So you're good. So I suppose let's take that a step further, because you've talked about demand creation and given some nice ideas, but I want to know what we can learn from the food industry, and especially with this challenge about what I said about, okay, maybe it can work, but there are not that many examples yet of how can you brand some generic food that's in your local food market? Can you?
Oh yes, the number of examples of that. For example, I'll give you an example from India. Right, in India, dry fruits, almonds have been part of the cuisine for a long, thousands of years. Right, but in about 2000s, the California almonds came in. Right, and they started to talk about energy that brings success. And in about 20 years, and then they associated with cricket, right? Cricket is like amazingly popular in India. Crickets, Bollywood celebrities. They also talked about the health benefits, but more like energy and success. In India, almonds are basically attributed to mental strength, but they kind of shifted the entire conversation. And today, and there are other almonds also available in the market, the Indian variety, the Iranian variety. But people go on to markets and shops and ask for California almonds. And this I know because we did a study, right? It's interesting. There's no brand called California almonds. Okay, so people have an attribution to a very, very commoditized product to California, right? I mean, that's I think it's about consistently building a narrative around a certain aspect. And again, to dream of success that was embedded in the brand.
So I want to hear some hard truths. What are we getting wrong in public health?
Okay. Now you're putting me in a spot. Public health professionals
Say it.
around the hall. Yeah.
Give it to us.
Okay. So David Ogilvy, who started the agency that I work with, right? He said something very interesting, and it's primarily in context to market research because he didn't believe in market research. But he said something very interesting. He said, people don't think what they feel. They don't say what they think, and they don't do as they say. Yeah, it's a very, very deep insight in how people behave. Yeah, and I think, and I have some experience in public health communication and the way it has evolved over the past few years. Public health looks at disease parameters, right? Prevalence, deficiencies. Again, I'll go back to my magic formula, right? Let's look at dream parameters of people, right? What is it that one food brings to the plate and the mind of the consumer? That's I think something that I think the hunger for profit is right now stronger than hunger for impact, and hunger for impact will come from leveraging dreams that reside in everyday human beings. And that's, I think, where there's an opportunity for public health, all the professionals in the room and outside this room, right? To leverage the hunger for impact, make it bigger than the hunger for profit. Yeah. So,
Yeah. Phil, I said it seems like a bit of a battle sometimes, and you said we need to fight the gorilla. So do you see it as a battle? Should we try? And I suppose, how do we fight that gorilla then? What are our top priority actions, policy actions that we need to really focus on?
Yeah, thanks. And I loved your comments, Atan. And it reminded me, actually, like when we talk about this industry and these corporations, we're not attacking the people in the industry or in the corporations. And Atan is a good example of a really nice guy who works for like we're attacking the system, right? We're talking about the system. And this is where this dialogue is really important. To take a step back and say, what are we actually doing here, and how is this whole system structured? How does it work? How is it working currently? And your comments also reminded me that throughout the Cold War, there was the U.S. government was leveraging Coca-Cola marketing in a huge way, and it was one of the reasons why Coca-Cola has become very successful as a symbol of freedom. And the term Coca-Colanization was coined.
God, Country, and Coca-Cola, the famous book, right?
Yeah, exactly. So Coca-Cola is not selling brown sugary liquid. Like if you took the label off it, it's just brown sugary liquid. It doesn't even look that. It looks terrible. It's selling freedom. And as you just said, in public health, we are also selling freedom. Freedom from disease, freedom from malnutrition, the freedom to live a dignified and healthy life, to be productive at work, at school. And we never tap into that, do we? Never tap into that. We talk about disease, relative risk ratios. You'll get your leg amputated if you drink this product. Death and disease and doom. Not
this, you'll get cancer.
Exactly. Yeah, it's just people like, oh my God, it's those health people again. But okay, so two things.
So
really.
you'll tell us what we're doing wrong in public health.
Answering your question.
Yeah.
The first thing is, how do we tackle the gorilla in the room? And the solution there is pretty simple, actually. You don't let the gorilla into your country. So at the moment, Coca-Cola doesn't have a big presence in sub-Saharan Africa, but it has huge ambitions. Nestle especially has huge ambitions to expand in Saharan Africa. At the moment, of the foreign direct investment coming into sub-Saharan Africa in the agri-food system, 20% of it is going towards the production, the manufacture of ultra-processed foods. 10% is going towards agri-food production, farm development, plantations. It's a ratio of 2 to 1. Okay, that's we need to square. We need to, that's just a simple recommendation. Rethink foreign direct investment by this industry, and those discussions are now happening at the FAO and the CFS and elsewhere. The second thing to say is regulate marketing. Like, the way to reduce the power of marketing is to regulate the marketing. Now, of course, when you try to do that, what happens? Well, all of that surplus profit the companies are generating from ultra-processed foods is also being spent on lobbyists, lawyers, getting their trade diplomats of the US government to go, speak to these ministers and prime ministers and presidents and say, do not put warning labels on your products. Otherwise, we will be retribution.
It makes me think of tobacco and the tobacco labels. I saw this post recently. Ariana Huffington said that big food is having its big tobacco moment. Do you think that's right?
I think it is because, you know, again, coming back to the side event in the morning, we'll talk about this. People are very, very aware of ultra processed foods now.
Yeah.
And we'll talk about this. Like the rise and the attention and awareness to ultra processed foods is massive. And it's a huge advantage of using the term ultra processed foods as opposed to other terms. Just like our response to the tobacco industry and public health, you know, we can use the same arguments, the same strategies: tax, label, restrict, regulate, get it out, you know, get these products out of schools. But unlike tobacco, ultra processed foods increases in people's diets by displacing other types of foods.
Yeah.
It increases in people's diets by displacing real food
Yeah.
and culturally appropriate foods and traditional foods and nutritionally important foods. And so it must also come, and this is, you know, speaking to what Temi was really talking about, it must come with a vision for creating a healthy and sustainable food economy. And I love this idea of territorial and regional and food economies. So what is a Pan-African cuisine or diet? Or what is an East African diet or cuisine that is healthy, that is sustainable, and that once we know what that is, or we can define it, we can start to build a food economy around it. We can start to increase the capacity. Yeah, and we can appeal to a sense of national identity and pride, and we can support the many thousands of existing African food producers, processors that employ a huge number of people in this region to provision that diet, supporting public markets. And I will finally just say, public institutions, you know, if school feeding programs are more than just feeding kids.
Yeah.
They take pressure off parents. They free up parents to do other things like work and education and so on. But they also create a market, and it's a solid market that's not going to go away. If you mandate that you have a school feeding program that's purchasing 50% of its food must come from that regional food catchment, from those farmers are going to start doing really well. And you're not only creating a food economy by doing that, you're also creating a political constituency. Those farmers, those parents are really going to like having more money and having the pressure of feeding their kids taken, you know, off them to some extent.
Yes, please.
So there are lots and lots of ideas we could explore like that, including what does that look like for what donors are trying to do in the region too? How do we create these types of big multi-component, multi-year, because these are multi-year, multi-decade projects. They're not short-term 2 to 3 year programming interventions. No. We need to change the way we think about this type of demand creation. Thanks.
So for each of you, I have about 3 million questions, but that's a bit greedy. So at this point, I would like to thank you all and open out to the room, because I know there are going to be a lot of burning questions for all of you. Are there other mics? Yes, there are. Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The name is Francis Zotor, African Nutrition Society. Very insightful discussions from the panelists. And the one question I wanted to ask Phil, and he's kind of answered it, is how do you take this gorilla out of the room? Do we have to? Yes. But again, don't let them in your country. But you see, they have subtle ways of coming into our country and filter into the system. Do we have to be deliberate? Do we have a conviction? When economies and countries want their taxes, these people find a way of coming in, they pay the taxes, and then before you realize, you have the sugar-sweetened beverages, as you rightly said, that go into the rural areas, into our economies, and that is even more cheap than the nutritious foods. And I've grappled with this challenge of what we are doing in our glass houses: education, education, education. How do we become militant in a way? I think the right way to go now is to be militant. Because if we see what is happening to people that are becoming cancerous, people who are becoming obese, people who are having those kind of challenges, we cannot sit by and do nothing. I'm frustrated. I don't know what is the way forward. Thank you.
Yeah, this ties to something I said to Phil. I said, "Oh, it feels daunting and intimidating." But I think, Phil, you have some reactions there around it needn't be, right?
Yeah, thank you. That was I really appreciate your comment. And yeah, I think there, it is really hard to stop that gorilla coming in. I mean, these companies will do everything they can to enter into new markets. And I will say, like, if the gorilla is in the room, and in Tanzania it already is, right? Like, there's a PepsiCo billboard right outside the conference or just down the road. Then tax that industry and use that resource that is generated through that taxation and invest it into supporting an alternative food economy. Invest that resources in healthy demand creation into the health system. But I think the other part of your point was, do we have the conviction? And this is another part of it that we haven't spoken about. Social mobilization, collective action, building a political movement around food. There's really, if you look across Latin America, which is where they are really succeeding in taking on this industry, that is a fight. And they frame it as a fight. And they form these huge coalitions of, NGOs, of lobbyists, political advocates, of senators and congressmen and congresswomen, of lawyers, of researchers to fight back against this industry. And they are winning, they are succeeding. And I think that is a model we can learn so much from all around the world. And I'd love to chat more with you about if that, is underway here in East Africa. Thank you.
Can we maybe take a set of 3 questions? If we'll try and keep them all in our heads whilst being put on the spot. Yeah, should we go 1, 2, 3?
Yeah, sure. Hi, thank you. Nilupa Gunaratna from Purdue University. I had a question to talk a little bit more about the goal and whether nutritious diets we're talking about creating demand for, is that a binary, or is there value in trying to work for something that is just better than what is available, even if it's less sugar rather than the absence of added sugar entirely, for example, or salt or whatever it is, if that should be the goal.
I should add, if you have a specific person that you want to address your question to, or if it's an open question to the panel, please say before you ask your question. To me, that feels like quite an open one. Does anyone want to take that?
So I'll give you an example what happened in India about 1.5 years ago, right? Levers has this particular milk food beverage for children in India, and one of the random influencers, right, food investigator influencers, what we call, right, they came up with the entire comparison of, it has so much sugar and it's beyond the RDAs and all. Generally used to happen earlier. This time, the sales got affected, right? The marketing team was panicking, so much so that now they're actually working on something which is less sugar content in, right? Now that's the part of that dream catcher people have in their hands, right? Social influencers who are trying to And I think that is where we need to leverage the connectivity between people. Can we make a difference? Yes, we can. Do we need to connect and do we need to gravitate towards it? Yes, that's the thing, right? The revolution will only happen when there are numbers on our side. So just to try and address that, what you said, I think this is an example you can probably, sleep over and think about, right?
Eva, you had something to add there as well. Thank you.
I'm a nutritionist, so I feel this is really a question really close to my heart. And I think right now the conversation is on ultra processed food because they're a huge threat. But let's be honest, these are new players in the room. We've had problems about improving diets for decades. I mean, otherwise we wouldn't have stunting. We wouldn't have micronutrient deficiencies, right? So we still have, this is an added problem that's coming on top of another problem. So we need to also be clear how far we can move people and move populations. And improvement is improvement, right? Nutritious diets is the vision, it's the goal, it's the end of the journey. But each country is starting in a different place, and we just have to move forward. And that's the important thing, in my perspective.
I said we'd take 3 questions and then promptly forgot about that. So I wanted to know the answer. Who had question number 2?
Okay.
Hi, good morning. This is Farhad Hassan from Bangladesh. So my question is from development practitioners and mostly from the stakeholders who are contributing to development, except private sector. We see private sectors as an enemy for promoting this. This is kind of a mindset that the development practitioners hold. And this is something I was thinking, that how can we basically really have a treaty with the private sectors, to promote these healthy diets or healthy demand for nutritious diets. So that is one big question that I'm still a project manager for USAID in Bangladesh. It's still the luckiest one to continue for a few more months. So from my aspect, I found that it is how can we actually change our mindset from development end and welcome the private sectors to help us support our development vision. And this is somewhere, so probably I would be happy to get some examples from them. And this is something from our experience, we have found that, yes, understanding the systems, understanding levers, and the key factor is the incentives.
Yeah.
How can we incentivize each and every actors to promote this? So probably I'd be happy to know some of the good advices, because we will still continue to do our work.
Yeah, I mean, we might have quite different perspectives as to whether we work with or against the food industry and the private sector. So please hold on to that, and we'll ask one question. The gentleman here has been waiting patiently.
Thank you so much. Samuel Awuni from Joseph Ayobabola University, Nigeria. My question I want to direct to Bhavani and probably Roy. The question is, don't you think we can also look at the fight against unhealthy food from social angle? Why did I say this? Take, for instance, in the developing world, Nigeria, for instance, people in the hinterland, they consume this food purposely because they are seeing it as a kind of social status thing. Like, I'll cook, I'm not there, I have money, let me spend it. So if you are just looking at it from an economic aspect, we may be losing the fight in the hinterland, and the fight is not going to be inclusive. So I think I should bring this up so that we could be holistic in our fight. Thank you.
Thank you. Let's take the first one. With or against the food industry? Any takes? Should we take a vote? Go ahead, please, Tim.
Yeah, so I'll make an attempt to answer the question. I think if I got the question correctly, is how can we change our mindset and welcome the private sector to help. I mean, one thing that we have to it's a fact that we must establish is that the private sector is driven, of course, by, profit. If it's profitable, they do it. If it's not profitable, they're not going to do it. So, and I think ultimately it's also linked to, I think, Francis's question. For me, the government has a big role to play in all of this. It's the reason we have, regulatory systems across all these countries. It's really how the government can, help us find a balance between development and the private sector. And I think Phil mentioned, that there's a simple tool the government could use, but I think the challenge here is that, there's a lot of, corruption also happening within the system where, private sector, executives just basically bribe their way, out and, roll out this stuff into the system. But I think somehow we can't escape the route of the rules of the regulators. How do we, in a very, intentional way, tax the, production of unhealthy foods, or encourage the private sector, the so-called private sector, to actually be more involved? And when we talk about private sector, we're also talking about, a number of organizations with different sizes. There are the large scale, companies. There are the small scale companies. I know that one thing that the government has done in a number of countries, in the past, is to drive large scale food fortification, basically leveraging what is already working. So if you have these very heavy, industries, large private sector, organizations producing what we think is unhealthy, how do we encourage them to make those healthy? And I think the government has kind of tried a number of ways to drive large-scale food fortification. Even in my country, Nigeria, there's been a number of, alliances within the private sector, led by, the largest companies in Nigeria to, at least ensure that there is that most of the, staple food items are, fortified with the right, minerals. Sometimes it's worked, sometimes it hasn't worked, and most of the times the reason it hasn't worked is because if the private sector companies sit down and crack the numbers, and they realize that, look, the cost of bringing in the premises, for this fortification doesn't make sense to us, and there's always a limit to what we pass to the consumers in terms of cost, they're going to abandon it. And the question also for us all is, what capacities and capabilities are there, within the private sector, within those regulatory organizations, to actually ensure that those things are happening. I think that's really the challenge. So again, I would say the work of the government, the work of the regulators, is very, very important. Now, on the flip side, for companies that are not really large scale, I know there's several organizations. I'm involved with another organization called the African Food Change Makers, trying to help support SMEs in food production. And when we talk about that from the perspective of, nutrient-dense food production by SMEs, there are quite a number of organizations doing that. How are we helping them? So in a way, how do we tax the, big guys with big budgets, and how do we subsidize, operations for these smaller companies that actually have most of their products more easily accessible, because most of their products reach the mass market more. And there are small organizations, they're struggling to implement, resilient business models. They're struggling every day. Really, what is the, what are the plans to really ensure that those organizations can operate profitably, and scale their operations? I think we have to start to think about, intentional programs around business incubation, accelerator programs, to really help these SMEs to actually scale their operations. The last thing I want to mention is, I think the power of storytelling. I think I was saying this. I think the power of storytelling sometimes is, we underplay the power of storytelling, and within the entrepreneur community of the African Food Change Makers, I'm beginning to see a lot of entrepreneurs who are just storytellers. working with chefs, and all kinds of players within the food systems to really tell the story around nutritious food.
Yeah, and actually, what you're saying about storytelling around food ties in quite nicely with the second question that we had around how do we kind of account for meaning of foods that goes beyond the sort of traditional or kind of overlooked meanings, and the kind of that people see in terms of the value that they put on foods. So that was to you, Bhavani and Aston. Did you want to come at those?
Yeah, thank you for the question. Really important question. And if I gave the impression that I only believe that it's all about the economics, believe me,
Someone had to.
I'm not wedded to it to that extent. So let me talk a little bit about the context of the project that I mentioned that we're working in India, where we're working with the markets, and we're trying to use it as a platform for delivering a number of interventions. That is, in terms of what value people put on foods, moving beyond the economics of it, absolutely agree 100%. There is a psychological element, there is a sociological element to food consumption, obviously, which are absolutely critical. And if you ignore those contexts, then obviously you're missing a massive part of the picture. Thankfully, we have a very, very bright team who are actually in this room and in this platform. There's this Helen who is leading some really cool work on demand creation for the project. There is Emily at the back of the room who's doing all kinds of cool stuff as well. There is Aten who's going to work with us to the dream weaver is going to weave some dreams for us. So what we're going to try and do is make it more desirable, make it more socially desirable. Just to give you some examples, Helen, Emily, and Co can describe this much better. But kids, a common problem with kids eating, say, spinach, green leafy vegetables is uncool, right? I mean, it's not a cool thing to do. How can we make that cool in this market setting? So how can we think about that? So there are different ways in which you can do it. Already in place in those markets is we are trying to reinvent fruits and vegetables as cool things to do. So there are activities for kids when they come in with their mums or dads to the market. There are games for them to play. Sometime we must get Emily to show you her fantastic Snakes and Ladders game. Yeah. So I think at the next ANH we should have one of those games that people can play. So it's a massive Snakes and Ladders game which is currently being designed and printed. Basically, the snakes are the UPFs and the fruit and veg and other things are the ladders, and there'll be dice and you can play, and then kids or grown-ups can stand there and they can move across. So we're just trying to make it interesting, make people think when they come to the market. There are likewise various activities that we do with the communities just to make people think and also make it acceptable for fruits and veg, for example, to be thought of as school. So for example, there is a video they can watch if they scan a QR code when they come to the market, which shows them videos, again, very creatively made by Emily and Co., which is basically trying to tell a story about kids who eat eggs and parents who buy eggs for their kids. This is the good thing to do. If you're a good parent, you should be buying an egg for your kid and feeding them an egg per day. Stuff like that, messaging, just to make it cool. And Aten's going to be creating, and this team are going to be creating a bunch of, really powerful videos and so on, messaging for us, hopefully, that will sort of enable us to tap into the pool of expertise that we don't have. So completely agree with you. There's a whole bunch of things that needs to be done. I think there is, it's fun, it's creative, not just for the communities. Obviously, we need to make it fun for them. But I think a lot of people in our team are finding that it's fun to sort of do that and just use your creative instincts as well. So just a little plug for our project, but yeah, thank you.
But Vanny, you said that spinach isn't cool, but my kids actually call spinach lollies because, they kind of look like that shape.
Yeah.
And they are super cool.
I was actually going to say that, right? So I don't know. I mean, in India, you have this flatbread called chapati. I don't know how many of you had it. I remember my mom making weird shapes out of it and feeding me when I was a kid. Yeah. I think mothers are the greatest creative directors the world has given us ever, right? They kind of channelize to raise a child and give nutritious diet is, I think, the biggest task, and mothers do it so well, right? I think Eric Topol in his book says that in the healthcare system, we have not leveraged the most powerful component, the patient. In the public health system, we have probably not leveraged the most powerful component, which is the health guardian of the family, the mother, right? Probably we need to leverage her more, put her in flow, and leverage her techniques of storytelling much more, right? I think that could be a great pivot for the communication and the storytelling that we are looking at.
I can't help but also say, also dads.
Yeah.
I have to say.
Yeah, the new dads.
I mean, my husband's also a father of two, and he's a far better, more creative storyteller than I. But now I would like to turn to some questions online, who will be asked by Joe. Hi, Joe.
Right, thanks, guys. Yeah, we've had a few questions. I won't direct them. I'll let you, Helen, maybe direct them.
Okay.
One is, how do you define a healthy and local diet while still maintaining the agency and sovereignty of the constituents you are trying to help?
Oh, that's a great one. Eva, I feel like that's, just to put you on the spot.
Shall I ask the second one quickly as well? Or do you want to,
please, yeah.
some of the powers behind the guerrillas are major sponsors during political campaigns in low and middle income countries.
Yeah.
How do you address this, and how do you stimulate political willpower? And if I might take the privilege of adding one more thing on there, which is also there, many of these companies and corporations are also increasingly sponsoring academics and the scientific environment. You know, some people in this room have written about what Nestle are up to in South Africa, for example. So I'd like to, if I could also add that in.
It's probably safe to assign that one to Phil. Thank you. Eva, over to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's many methods that are out there that people can use to study what is a locally just and culturally appropriate diet. I mean, there's this whole area of anthropology and ethnography that brings methods to bear on how to do that. So I think there's ways that we can already use, but it starts with the people. It starts with the consumers, and it starts also taking away our preconceived notions as well. So sometimes we pontificate. We say, oh, this is what a healthy diet is. But I think we have to meet consumers halfway, because as Bhavani mentioned, people are making choices under constraints of time, constraints of income, constraints of many other stress, many other things that are happening, of climate stress, of political injustices. So we do need to approach this with a lot of compassion and care for the communities that we work with. So really spending time to understand that, and then trying to meet communities there and taking them along that journey, right? That's going to require many years of transformation.
Yeah, that kind of also comes to, I concluded my introductory remarks by directly lifting something that Phil said about how can we center the agency and aspirations of people around the world and what we define as a healthy diet. And thanks for giving me that, because exactly, we need to understand that. Phil, over to you around the how the gorillas are everywhere, basically.
Yeah. So this is I don't know if this is working or not.
Yeah, I think it's working.
Oh, it is. Sorry. Okay. Now it's not. Now it is. Okay. Yeah. So this was a big focus of our work over the last 3 years, is mapping this corporate influence by the industry, mapping its corporate lobby networks, its multi-stakeholder initiatives, its partnerships with governments and UN agencies, and the litigation the industry's doing against multiple governments right now, and so on and so forth. And yeah, someone said to me, if you picture all of that evidence you've collected on the power of this industry, it's pretty overwhelming. We may as well just give up. And And the answer to that is, oh, no way. It's the opposite. Let's lean in and do more of this research to shine sunlight onto these networks of corporate power, the political donations that are being made all around the world. And let's think about ways of tackling it. And there are, I would say there are lots of ways of tackling it, but there are probably two main ones that I will just speak to briefly. One is, what can governments do to tackle that? We know that if you mandate political transparency laws and you have public registers for lobbyists, if you have publicly available databases of who's paying who political donations, if you put conflict of interest safeguards in your policy-making room, in your governance bodies, like many governments have done for tobacco control. Nepal, one of the leading countries in the world, and safeguarding, firewalling its policy processes from the tobacco industry. We can do that for food as well. Just say you will be consulted, but that will happen publicly in a transparent manner for everyone to see. You will not have access to our policymakers, our political leaders, our scientists, our advocates. You need to, respect that boundary. And if we do that, I think some companies will respect it. But until we do that, they will continue to infiltrate and lobby and influence and litigate. Second thing to say is building coalitions. So right across Latin America, we have really good lessons on how to do that. And what are the strategies those coalitions use to take on these corporations? In Mexico, the country I'm most familiar with, it's a combination of, you have dedicated political advocates who are going to Parliament or Congress every day, every week if possible, and talking to politicians, getting senators, getting congresswomen and men on their side, and building those parliamentary coalitions. You combine that with advocacy and communications, people who have media capabilities, like our wonderful journalists in the audience, working with these legends to create, editorials and really compelling media stories. And so you do that. You team up with researchers who can, do the policy evaluation, come up with the policy evidence, evaluate those policies. And finally, you are teaming up with people who have really powerful voices, and that includes youth, young people, getting them into those coalitions like they are in the Caribbean. And they are just absolutely amazing at these young people. How articulate they are, how passionate they are, and how powerful they are, and getting them into these. Those coalitions, Amos, more to that about in the context of Ghana. I was talking to a colleague yesterday about that coalition building underway across the border in Kenya. And of course, South Africa has a really long-standing and quite powerful and influential coalition. So how do we strengthen them? How do we get behind them? How do we support them? How do we resource them? Over.
Yeah, it sounds like there are a lot of trailblazers and people really shining and leading the way that we can learn from. I wish we could carry on talking about this, because it has just been the most rich and interesting discussion. But I think we need to stop there so that everyone can have some lunch. It's lunch, right? No. Mini posters. You have to hold mini posters. But yeah, thank you so much to everyone for joining. I hope that you feel motivated, inspired, not intimidated, but instead with a fire in your belly about what we can do to improve diets around the world and to fight the gorillas where they are. And thank you so much to our excellent panel for taking the time to give us such important and rich insights into this really quite complicated but extremely important issue. Thank you.